The world had fallen silent. The hum of bustling cities, the whir of technology, the chatter of global unity, gone. What remained was a fractured, decaying planet, a shadow of the Earth humanity once knew. The great nations, once mighty powers, now existed as fragmented pockets of survival, each faction guarding its borders, its resources, and its pride with paranoid zeal. Natural disasters, economic collapse, and endless wars had carved the Earth into a patchwork quilt of chaos. Elias stood on the edge of what used to be New York City, gazing out over the ruins. Once the heartbeat of the world, the city had fallen victim to a catastrophic rise in sea levels and violent storms. Now, only skeletal skyscrapers and half-drowned streets remained, a grim reminder of the Earth's wounds. To many, the world was beyond saving, but Elias refused to believe that. He had lived through the worst of it, seen the great cities burn, watched entire nations crumble into dust. Yet in the deepest part of his being, he knew there was something more to humanity than destruction. In the underground resistance stronghold he called home, Elias paced, outlining his plans on the walls of a makeshift war room. His allies, a small group of survivors from various factions, huddled around a flickering map. They were all experts in their respective fields, engineers, former soldiers, scientists, people who had witnessed the fractures up close. The scars of Earth's devastation were personal to them, but they were also the last hope of a dying world. Elias' message was simple yet radical. Humanity had to come together. It didn't matter who had been at fault for the Earth's collapse or which faction held the most power. If humanity was going to survive, it needed to unite. "Look at this," Elias said, gesturing toward the map. "We've all been fighting for scraps. Resources are dwindling, the oceans are rising, the land is scarred, and the air's toxic. But what if we stopped fighting each other? What if we built something new together? This world doesn't have to stay broken." The room was silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Across the table, Amina, a former diplomat from a neighboring faction, frowned. "We've tried that before. Look where it got us. Every time someone tried to unite us, they ended up as a target for those in power. The warlords, the radicals, they'll never agree." Elias' eyes narrowed. "If we don't try, we'll have no future. We'll be reduced to scavengers, fighting over what little's left. If we don't come together, humanity won't survive another generation." His words were not just rhetoric, they were truth, carved into his heart by years of loss. The factions were not just divided by borders or ideologies, they were divided by fear, distrust, and hatred. Each faction saw the others as a threat, a reminder of what had been lost. But Elias was determined to show them that unity, however impossible it seemed, was their only chance to rebuild. That night, he recorded a broadcast, his voice calm but resolute. "We are at a crossroads. The Earth is dying, but we don't have to go with it. I'm not asking for miracles. I'm asking for unity. We can do this, together." As the transmission aired across fractured Earth, Elias didn't know if it would change anything, but deep down, he knew it had to. Because if humanity was ever to heal, it would be through the strength of its unity, born from the ashes of the shattered world. And in that moment, Elias made a vow. He would not let Earth fade into dust without one last fight. The journey to unite the factions was not one Elias could undertake alone. He knew that his words alone wouldn't be enough. If there was any hope for peace, he would need the support of those who had the power to change minds and command armies. Yet, trust was a fragile thing in this fractured world. Leaders had their own agendas, and Elias was nothing more than a hopeful voice in the dark. Convincing them to join forces would be a battle in itself. Elias's first stop was the Dominion, a militaristic faction led by General Korak, a grizzled war veteran who ruled with an iron fist. The Dominion was one of the largest remaining factions, fortified by powerful technology scavenged from the ruins of old world cities. It had survived the longest by dominating smaller groups and forcing them to bend to its will. Korak, a man of few words, was notorious for his disdain of diplomacy. He believed only in strength, a philosophy born from years of warfare. Elias arrived at the heavily guarded Dominion stronghold, an imposing fortress built into the side of a mountain. The air was thick with tension as he approached the gates, a dozen armed guards watching his every move. The world outside the walls had long since descended into lawlessness, but within the Dominion, order reigned through sheer force. Korak met Elias in a dimly lit command room, surrounded by maps and battle plans. The general's eyes were sharp, scrutinizing Elias's every word. "You're wasting your time," Korak said bluntly, his voice deep and steady. "Unity? It's a dream, your dream, but the reality is different. You can't change the nature of men. You can't undo what's been done." Elias stood firm. "What if I told you that the only thing standing between our survival and extinction is our willingness to work together? We're all running out of time. The resources we fight for won't last much longer. If we don't unite, we'll all fall." Korak's expression softened, but only slightly. "I've seen enough bloodshed to know that people will kill for less. The people I lead won't bend for some idealistic cause. I've seen what happens when hope leads men, nothing but ashes." Elias's voice dropped, a quiet urgency replacing his usual conviction. "What happens when there's nothing left to fight over? What happens when there's only death?" For a long moment, Korak said nothing. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of 1,000 past battles. But eventually, the general spoke, his tone measured but reluctant. "Fine, I'll consider it, but don't expect me to gamble everything on your naive vision." Elias didn't flinch. It was a start, and that was all he needed. The next meeting was with Leona, the leader of the Pioneers, a faction that thrived in the scattered remains of old-world technology. The Pioneers were innovators, a group of brilliant minds working in isolated communities to advance their understanding of the world. Unlike Korak, Leona was a scientist at heart, driven by logic and reason. But her people were fiercely independent, and like all factions, they had no desire to bend their knees to another. Leona was initially skeptical of Elias's proposal. She questioned how an alliance could possibly work when so many of her people had been persecuted by others in the past. She had spent years building a haven for those who could survive without the crutches of the old world, those who relied on knowledge, not brute strength. But Elias's words echoed in her mind, and after careful consideration, she agreed to meet. Their conversation was long and filled with debates over how humanity could overcome its internal division. Leona wasn't easily swayed, but she saw something in Elias, a determination that reminded her of her own people's resilience. "We've learned the hard way that we can't do this alone," Leona finally conceded. "You have my support, Elias, but it will be a difficult road ahead. The others won't trust us." Elias nodded. "That's why we need each other. One faction alone can't save us, but together, we stand a chance." The first pieces of the fragile alliance were in place. Korak and Leona had agreed to a truce, though it was far from a complete victory. Many more leaders needed to be persuaded, and each step forward would be met with resistance. But for the first time in a long while, Elias saw a spark of hope. The path ahead was uncertain, and the weight of failure pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he knew that without trying, the future would be lost. He set his sights on the next destination, knowing that the hardest part was yet to come. The fragile unity Elias had worked so hard to forge was already beginning to show cracks. While the leaders of the Dominion and the Pioneers had agreed to the alliance, their people were far less convinced. The moment the first coalition summit convened, tensions between the factions erupted into open conflict. The air in the assembly hall was thick with mistrust. Leaders from the various factions, each one with a different vision for Earth's future, were seated at a long table, their eyes narrow and wary. It had taken weeks of negotiation to get them all in the same room, and already it seemed as though everything could fall apart. Elias had hoped that the shared threat of extinction might keep the peace, but he quickly realized that the wounds of the past were not so easily healed. Leaders shouted across the table, arguing over everything from resource distribution to cultural autonomy. The Dominion representatives, led by General Korak, were the loudest, pushing for military dominance in the coalition. They demanded control over security, claiming that only their experienced soldiers could protect the fragile alliance. Korak's words were blunt, his soldiers standing like silent sentinels behind him, their cold stares making it clear that they were not here for diplomatic games. Leona, the representative from the pioneers, was quick to counter. If your idea of unity is force, then we are already doomed. This isn't about guns and armies. This is about building something that lasts. Her voice was calm but cutting. The pioneers had always been about progress, not power, and they had little interest in Korak's vision of a military-led world. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room, but it wasn't enough to quell the rising storm. The delegates from the Eastern factions, a nomadic group known for their fiercely independent ways, scoffed at the entire concept of unification. They had spent generations fighting to preserve their way of life, surviving on their own terms. To them, Elias's dream of a united Earth was just another attempt to erase their identity in favor of some distant, flawed ideal. "Why should we trust anyone?" spat Carla, the leader of the Eastern faction. "We've been betrayed before, and now you expect us to sit at the same table with those who've burned our cities and taken our lands." Elias stood, trying to keep his voice steady. He had expected opposition, but the level of animosity was overwhelming. "This isn't about erasing who you are. This is about survival. If we don't unite now, we won't have anything left to protect. We have no time for old grudges." But his words fell flat. The room erupted in chaos, with each leader staking their claim to what they felt was rightfully theirs. Shouting and accusations filled the air, the tension so thick that it seemed the entire summit could descend into violence at any moment. Elias could feel the weight of failure pressing on him. He had seen humanity's divisions firsthand, but witnessing them on such a scale left him breathless. The worst part was the feeling of helplessness. Every faction had its own reasons for resistance, whether pride, past betrayals, or fear of losing power, and no matter how many times he tried to appeal to their common humanity, it wasn't enough to quiet their fears. The rifts between them were deep, too deep for words to bridge. That night, as Elias walked through the ruined city that served as the summit's location, he questioned everything. Was it even possible to unite these people? Had he been too optimistic, too naive in believing that humanity could heal itself? The weight of the failure seemed unbearable, but even in his darkest moments, one thought remained clear: he couldn't give up. Not now, not when the Earth's future was at stake. Elias returned to the summit the next morning, exhausted but resolute. The rifts between the factions were vast, but there was still a glimmer of hope, buried beneath the animosity. He had to find a way to reach them, not with words, but with action. And that action would have to come soon, before the world tore itself apart. Just when Elias thought things couldn't get worse, a new threat emerged from the heavens. The fragile peace he had fought so hard to maintain was shattered by an event so terrifying it left the summit's fractured leaders paralyzed with fear. It began with a faint signal, an anomalous radio transmission, too structured and deliberate to be of human origin. At first, no one believed it. The Earth had long been plagued by false alarms and distractions, rogue transmissions from distant satellites, cosmic radiation, and random signals from the far reaches of the universe. But this was different. The message was clear, though cryptic. It spoke of a new era and warned humanity of an imminent convergence. It was not a plea for help, nor was it a declaration of war. Instead, it was a calm, matter-of-fact transmission. Earth was no longer alone, and an alien force was watching. The signal came from a point in space no one had ever explored, far beyond any known human outpost. But the implications were clear. Elias called an emergency session with the summit leaders, even though their previous tensions hadn't been resolved. This time, there was no arguing about resources or power. The focus was now solely on the unknown threat that loomed overhead. The room was eerily quiet as everyone absorbed the message. Leona, ever the pragmatist, was the first to speak. It could be a hoax. It's too convenient, too well-timed. It could be a ploy by one of our own factions to sow discord. But Korok, whose instincts were honed from years of battle, disagreed. No, this isn't some fabrication. I've seen enough to recognize when something is real. The question is not whether it's real, but whether we're ready for it. The rest of the room murmured in agreement, though fear was etched on every face. What could this convergence mean? Was it a warning of some cosmic disaster, or something more deliberate, something far more sinister? For days, the summit was consumed with speculation. Then the first wave of proof arrived. Suddenly, massive ships appeared in Earth's upper atmosphere. They were silent, almost ghostly in their precision, their sleek forms breaking through the clouds without a single sound. There were no grand speeches, no demands for surrender, only the unmistakable presence of something far more advanced than humanity's greatest technological achievements. The ships hovered above the planet, cloaked in an impenetrable silence, as if waiting for something or someone. From the vantage point of a few scattered resistance camps, people reported seeing flashes of light from the alien vessels, as if they were scanning the planet's surface. Communications with space stations went dead, their signals jammed by a strange, unknown force. The world watched as humanity's ability to even reach the stars seemed to falter, overwhelmed by a force they couldn't comprehend. On the ground, the factions were in chaos. Some factions, terrified of the unknown, immediately declared their allegiance to the aliens, offering to cooperate in exchange for protection. Others resisted, fearing that any cooperation would result in humanity being enslaved or exterminated. The pioneers, still cautious, attempted to study the aliens from afar, their scientists analyzing any data they could gather. The Dominion, ever the warriors, prepared for battle, rallying their forces in anticipation of an invasion. Elias, in the middle of this escalating crisis, felt the weight of every decision pressing on him. What were these aliens really after? Were they saviors or conquerors? No one knew. But one thing was certain, this was no mere warning. The aliens had come to Earth with an undeniable presence, and humanity was not prepared for what lay ahead. In the midst of the confusion, Elias knew that if he was to stand a chance of uniting the factions, he would need to act fast. The world was on the brink of total collapse, and an enemy no one fully understood loomed on the horizon. But this time, it wasn't just Earth's future at stake, it was the future of humanity itself. If the factions couldn't come together now, against a threat far greater than their petty squabbles, they might never have another chance. Days passed, and the alien ships remained above Earth, silent and unyielding. Their presence was like a suffocating fog, clouding every thought and action. Leaders of the fractured factions began to question their previous priorities, realizing that old rivalries meant little in the face of a threat that none of them could fully comprehend. Some leaders, eager to avoid conflict, called for surrender, while others, fueled by a mix of fear and pride, rallied their forces, preparing for war. But amidst the chaos, there were whispers of something far more unsettling. The aliens had made contact. It started with the pioneers. Leona and her team, who had been studying the aliens' movements, intercepted another transmission, a more direct form of communication. This time, it wasn't just a cryptic message. The aliens spoke plainly, in perfect human language, but their words carried a weight far heavier than any of the previous warnings. "We are not here to conquer," the voice said. "We are here to offer what your species has long been denied: understanding." The message sent shockwaves through the factions. While some still believed it to be a deception, others, like Leona, were inclined to listen. The message was followed by a strange, yet undeniable, display of power. The aliens began to broadcast images of Earth's history, moments of humanity's greatest achievements and its darkest failures. They showed the rise and fall of civilizations, the technological advancements, and the wars that had torn the world apart. It was as if they had been watching humanity for centuries, studying both its brilliance and its flaws. Elias, determined to understand what this all meant, called for an emergency meeting with the faction leaders. When they convened, the tension in the room was palpable. The Dominion representatives, who had once been prepared to fight, were now uncertain. Korak stood with his arms crossed, his steely gaze fixed on the holographic projection of the alien ships hovering above Earth. "We are being watched," Korak said, his voice low. "But why now? Why us?" Elias nodded, his mind racing. "These aliens have seen everything. They've been observing us for far longer than we realize. This isn't a random event. This is their intervention." Leona spoke next, her voice hesitant but filled with awe. "What if they're offering us a chance to change? What if they want to guide us?" The message, it wasn't just a threat. It was an invitation to evolve. The room fell silent as the gravity of her words sank in. The idea of the aliens not as conquerors, but as potential guides, seemed almost too good to be true. But what if it wasn't? What if this was humanity's chance to evolve beyond its self-destructive cycles? The possibilities were mind-boggling. At that moment, a new message came through, a direct broadcast to Earth's leaders. The alien voice, calm and unyielding, spoke again. "Humanity's history has been one of division, violence, and suffering, but your species is at a crossroads. The path you choose will determine your future. We offer you the knowledge to transcend your limitations, but first, you must prove your worth by uniting. The strength of your species lies not in your weapons, nor in your intellect alone, but in your ability to come together as one." The words hung in the air like a heavy fog. The aliens weren't demanding submission or obedience. Instead, they were presenting humanity with a test. Could they set aside their differences and come together for a greater cause? For a moment, Elias felt a glimmer of hope. This was what he had been trying to achieve all along: unity. But now, it wasn't just for survival. It was for evolution, for the chance to take humanity to a new stage of existence. If humanity failed to unite, the consequences were unclear, but Elias knew it would mean the end of any chance at peace or progress. The summit room was still, the weight of the alien message pressing on each leader. Could they put aside centuries of distrust and hatred to reach for something greater? Could they rise above their fractured world and join together in the face of an unknown future? Elias knew the answer, but convincing the others would take more than words. It would take action, courage, and an unwavering belief that humanity could be more than its fractured past. The alien message reverberated through the fractured world like a thunderclap. Leaders from every corner of Earth, once deadlocked in endless disputes, now found themselves united by a singular force: fear. But beneath that fear, there was something else, a spark of hope. The aliens had offered humanity a path forward, one that hinged on unity. But to reach that future, the factions would have to put aside their old grudges and cooperate. The window of opportunity was narrow, and time was running out. Elias knew that the greatest challenge lay not in convincing the leaders, but in convincing their people. The masses had grown accustomed to survival by any means, believing that strength lay in division. For centuries, Earth had been shaped by the need to conquer, to dominate, to protect one's own at all costs. Now, suddenly, they were being asked to do the impossible: to come together. How could they trust one another when every instinct told them to fight for their own survival? As the alien ships loomed overhead, their silent presence a constant reminder of the stakes, Elias worked tirelessly to build a coalition, meeting with leaders, arranging secret talks, and pushing each faction toward an uneasy agreement. It wasn't easy. Korok's dominion still balked at the idea of sharing power with others, while the pioneers remained skeptical of any alliance built on military strength. The eastern factions, once scattered and independent, feared they would lose their hard-earned autonomy in the face of a global government. Every step forward was met with resistance, and every success was hard-won. But slowly, Elias began to see cracks in the walls of distrust. The urgency of the alien threat began to overshadow the bitterness of old feuds. Leaders who had once sworn never to speak to each other now found themselves negotiating, making compromises. The pioneers agreed to share their technology in exchange for a voice in the new governance, while the Dominion reluctantly accepted the idea of a unified command structure that did not solely favor military might. Even the eastern factions, despite their fear of being subsumed, agreed to a limited form of cooperation, recognizing that survival depended on collaboration. Then, just as the first signs of unity began to take root, the aliens made their move. Without warning, a series of pulsating beams of energy shot from the hovering ships, striking key military and technological installations across the planet. Cities were crippled, communications were severed, and vast stretches of land were rendered uninhabitable in a matter of hours. It wasn't an invasion, not in the traditional sense, but an overwhelming demonstration of their power, an unambiguous reminder that humanity was under observation, and its survival was no longer a given. The response was immediate. The factions, now temporarily united by the shared devastation, quickly set aside their differences. Leaders put aside their fears, knowing that to fight among themselves now would mean total annihilation. The alien strike had forged something stronger than a fragile alliance. It had ignited the fire of true unity. But this unity was not born from trust, not yet. It was born from necessity, from the understanding that the only way to survive this invasion was to stand together. In the wake of the attack, Elias stood before a council of leaders, his voice steady but filled with urgency. "This is it. We have no choice. If we fight among ourselves, we will fall. The aliens are not invaders, at least, not in the way we thought, but they have shown us their power. If we do not come together now, we will be destroyed." Korok, for the first time, met Elias's gaze with something other than suspicion. He had seen the devastation firsthand, and his hardened heart was beginning to soften. "What do you propose?" he asked, his voice low but willing. Elias's answer was simple: "We fight together. We use our strengths as one force. We learn what we can from the pioneers. We build a new Earth, one where we are not divided by borders, but united by our survival." For the first time in a long while, there was no argument. The faction leaders, scarred by their own histories, looked around at each other, their past fears and enmities temporarily pushed aside. The enemy they faced was too great, and their chances for survival too slim to cling to old grudges. The fragile unity that had once been a dream was now a reality, forged in the crucible of the alien assault. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't without its dangers, but for the first time in centuries, humanity was united, not by choice, but by necessity. Elias knew that the real fight was just beginning. The alien forces were still out there, and humanity's newfound unity would be tested in ways they could never have imagined. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of hope, knowing that the first step toward saving Earth had finally been taken. The uneasy alliance that had formed between the fractured factions of Earth was now put to the ultimate test. The alien ships, their silent forms looming ominously above the planet, had already shown their destructive power. They had crippled humanity's most vital infrastructure, bringing entire cities to their knees in a matter of hours. But what followed was something even more terrifying: a countdown. A signal broadcasted from the alien ships, a simple, terrifying countdown that echoed across the globe. The message was clear: humanity had 1 week to prove its worth, or Earth would become an extension of the alien empire. The meaning behind the countdown was unmistakable. Either the factions of Earth united to defend themselves, or they would face total annihilation. Elias knew that time was running out. The fragile unity that had been formed in the wake of the alien assault would not be enough to withstand the oncoming storm unless it could be strengthened, and quickly. Leaders who had once been bitter rivals now found themselves in war rooms together, strategizing their defense. The Dominion offered their military expertise, while the pioneers shared their advanced technology. The Eastern factions contributed vital knowledge of Earth's terrain, offering insight into the natural defenses that could be exploited in their favor. Every faction, once focused solely on its own survival, was now forced to share its resources and knowledge for the good of the whole. But even in the face of this united front, there was a palpable tension. Trust had not been fully earned, and every decision was fraught with suspicion. The first day of coordinated military efforts revealed the gaps in their unity. Commanders from different factions struggled to communicate effectively, their strategies clashing, their egos unwilling to bend to a common cause. The Dominion's military precision often collided with the more unconventional tactics of the pioneers, while the Eastern forces remained hesitant, unwilling to fully commit to any strategy they did not deem in their best interest. The real test came when the alien ships descended further into Earth's atmosphere, releasing massive drones that began sweeping across cities and military outposts, unleashing destructive blasts of energy that vaporized anything in their path. The cities that had been left intact after the initial assault were now vulnerable to these relentless strikes. It was clear that the aliens were preparing for an invasion, a ground war designed to finish what their orbital bombardment had started. In response, Elias and the summit leaders had no choice but to act quickly. They called for a full-scale counterattack, bringing together the best soldiers and scientists from every faction to mount a defense. It wasn't just about military power, it was about survival, and they had to be willing to risk everything. The first battle took place over what had once been a thriving city in the heart of Europe, now a smoking ruin after the alien drones had made their first pass. The factions sent everything they had into the fray: ground troops, tanks, drones, and newly developed anti-aircraft weapons. The fight was brutal. The alien drones were far more advanced, their agility and firepower unmatched by anything humanity had developed. But humanity fought back with everything it had. The Dominion forces struck first, coordinating attacks with brutal efficiency. The pioneers' technology shifted the tides, providing humanity with energy shields and advanced weapons that temporarily stalled the alien assault. The Eastern forces, using their intimate knowledge of the land, launched guerrilla strikes, ambushing the alien drones in ways that surprised even their own allies. But it wasn't enough. Despite their fierce resistance, the humans were outmatched. The aliens' weaponry was beyond anything the humans could comprehend, and soon the battlefield was littered with the wreckage of fallen soldiers, destroyed weapons, and decimated cities. For every drone that was brought down, 2 more seemed to take its place. As the days wore on, it became apparent that the aliens weren't simply waging war, they were eradicating humanity's capacity to resist. In a final desperate move, Elias and the summit leaders authorized the use of the most advanced weapon the pioneers had developed: a powerful energy cannon capable of focusing massive bursts of energy into a single point. The hope was simple: hit the aliens where it hurt, disable their command ship, and buy enough time for humanity to regroup. As the cannon charged, the alien drones intensified their assault, their attacks growing more ruthless. The countdown from the alien ships was nearing its final moments. Humanity had one last chance, and Elias was determined to see it through. He stood among the leaders, watching the energy cannon power up, hoping that, somehow, they could break the alien hold on Earth. The weapon fired. A brilliant beam of light streaked across the sky, cutting through the atmosphere and smashing into the heart of the alien command ship. The resulting explosion lit up the night sky, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. For a moment, everything went still. The alien drones froze in mid-flight, their systems compromised. It was a brief window of hope. Elias knew it wasn't over yet. The aliens were still too powerful, too numerous. But for the first time in days, he allowed himself a breath. The fight was far from won, but humanity had proven something crucial. When faced with extinction, even the most fractured species could unite in the face of annihilation. The battle for Earth had only just begun, but for the first time, humanity had a fighting chance. The explosion that rocked the alien command ship reverberated through the atmosphere, sending shockwaves across the battlefield and igniting a fleeting hope among humanity's battered forces. For a brief moment, the relentless onslaught of alien drones halted. The sudden cessation of their attacks allowed the coalition of factions a precious moment to regroup, but Elias knew it was only temporary. The aliens had not been defeated, not by a long shot. But that blast had done something far more important than damage. It had given humanity a glimmer of hope, something that had been in short supply since the beginning of the conflict. The aliens, their communication networks in disarray, scrambled to regain control, but the momentum had shifted. The human alliance had managed to push back, slowly but surely. The pioneers, who had developed the energy cannon, worked quickly to build more, knowing that every shot they took could be the one that turned the tide. The Dominion's military forces, relentless and disciplined, began to push forward in coordinated strikes, taking advantage of the temporary confusion among the alien forces. The eastern factions, once so hesitant, launched ambushes with renewed vigor, striking key positions and using guerrilla tactics to disrupt the aliens' operations. But it was clear that the battle had no simple resolution. The alien invaders were not easily deterred. Despite the damage to their command ship, the alien forces began to regroup, their drones adapting rapidly to the new tactics being employed by humanity. Yet for the first time, the humans were not acting as a fractured collection of factions, but as a united front. Every strike, every maneuver was coordinated, each faction contributing its unique strengths. What had once seemed like an impossible dream was now a tangible reality. Unity in the face of extinction. Elias stood at the front lines, watching as the Allied forces pressed onward. His mind raced with possibilities. What if they failed? What if the aliens overwhelmed them again? Yet, amid the chaos of war, he could sense a change. The very nature of humanity was shifting. People who had once been divided by race, ideology, and geography now fought side by side, their collective will focused on a single goal: survival. The fight raged on for days, each side sustaining heavy losses, but humanity's resilience had proven itself. The aliens had underestimated the strength of a united Earth. As the days wore on, the aliens' once impenetrable defenses began to falter, their overwhelming superiority starting to lose its edge against the human coalition's adaptability and resourcefulness. Then, as the final hours of the countdown approached, humanity launched a final, all-out assault on the alien fleet. Using their newfound cooperation and their advanced technology, they managed to disable the remaining alien command ships one by one. The human forces, bolstered by sheer determination and the knowledge that this was their last chance, fought with everything they had left. The final push came when the largest of the alien ships, still hovering above Earth, was struck by a concentrated blast from the energy cannons, igniting a chain reaction that tore through the alien fleet. It was a victory forged in desperation, in the fire of humanity's final stand. When the smoke cleared, the sky was no longer filled with alien ships. The atmosphere was still, the relentless hum of enemy forces silenced. Earth had survived. The invasion was over, and the alien threat, at least for now, had been vanquished. But the true victory was not in the destruction of the alien fleet. It was in what humanity had learned in the process. The alliance that had been forged in the heat of battle was not simply the result of necessity. It was a testament to humanity's ability to evolve, to adapt, and to come together when everything seemed lost. The world had changed forever, and the fractures that had once seemed insurmountable were now the foundation of a new era. Elias stood amidst the ruins of the battle, looking out over the horizon. The dawn was breaking. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace, not because the war was over, but because humanity had found its strength in unity. There would be rebuilding, yes, and the scars of war would remain, but Earth had proven that even in the face of annihilation, there was hope, a hope that humanity could not only survive but thrive. As the sun rose over a world forever altered, Elias knew that the true challenge had just begun. The struggle for unity was not over, it had only just begun. But for the first time, humanity stood together, and together, they would forge a new future. A new dawn had come, not just for Earth, but for the very spirit of humanity itself.